Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Diana Shad. I'm the director of the Family Business Alliance, and we are thrilled to not be live, but at least be a live streaming, so we can feel a little bit more connected to you. Today, we will be focusing on leadership during difficult times. And as many of you know, there can be difficulties in the family, there can be difficulties in the business. And oftentimes, if there's difficulty in one, it usually transfers into the other. So that's one of the unique things about family businesses. I am thrilled today to welcome Tim Shad from Newcraft, Kyle Verplank from Verplank Enterprises, and Doug Young from Bueller Young to share their stories and their struggles that they faced with both their businesses and their families over the years. A few logistical things. The first is that they'll be presenting their stories, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Feel free to send any questions as you think of them. I'll be checking the chat boxes and the Q&A boxes on the Zoom call. So feel free to send them, and we'll be spending about a half hour at the end answering as many questions as we're able to. In order to fully enjoy the program, you should try to put it on full screen so that you can see all the speakers and all the slides that we're displaying. And then also, lastly, this is a personal favor, is if there is a glaring problem, text us and let us know. Put it in the chat box. If you can't hear us or if you can't see something, just send us a text in the chat so that we're aware of it going on. We are monitoring it, but you all are able to see things better than we are. I wanted to thank our underwriters, our platinum underwriters, BDO, Warner, and Fifth Third Bank, and our gold underwriters, Bright Star, Varnum, Chase, and Welsh & Associates. And a huge thank you to Haley Brown, who has been coordinating all of our technology. Those who know me know I'm not great with technology, so I'm a little nervous right now. But Haley has done a terrific job with everything. So anyway, we are thrilled to have you here. Please send your questions. And now I will introduce Tim Shad. I have the pleasure of being Tim's daughter-in-law. I'm married to his son, Matt. And Tim is the third generation with Newcraft Office Furniture. It was started by his great-grandfather, I think about 75 years ago. And they make office furniture. And Tim was running the company when I first met Matt, and his stories will sort of revolve around that time. And now Matt and Brandon are currently active working with the company, and they're the fourth generation. So Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Diana. I hope you don't mind if I take my mask off. I have nothing against masks, but I'm happy we're with it off. My name is Tim Shad, and I'm the third generation to run Newcraft, and I'm the one who almost killed it. That's what my story is about. The story is how we implemented, or almost didn't implement, the bond system at Newcraft Furniture Company. In early 1996, in January, I had been president of the company for about 10 years, and I was ready to implement world-class manufacturing. I was going to take us into the new century, and we were going to be a great world-class manufacturing company. We had previously organized into teams, so the entire company was organized into teams. We had team leaders instead of foremen. We were doing all the world-class things that one could do at that point. Everybody felt empowered, and we were moving forward. We were going to be a world-class company. We made mostly tables and bookcases and some conference products, so it was a different product line than we're making now. But the way the company had been set up for really several generations, going back to my grandfather's age, is that the machine room ran to stock and made pieces, and then the finishing room finished to order, and they finished customers' orders as they came in. And so we had the machine room running to stock, a big white stock inventory in between the two of them, and then the finishing room pulling things out of inventory and making them to order. Now, the goal of world-class manufacturing was to make everything to order, which they called at that point one-piece flow. We were going to eliminate that big white stock warehouse that was in the middle of the factory. I knew it was going to be challenging, so I hired a great consulting company. Arthur Andersen Consulting to help us implement this system. Together, we picked the bond system, which Herman Miller was using at that time for our ERP system. That's Enterprise Requirements Planning. Many of you are going to, I'm sure, quake when you hear those words because you've had the same experiences as me. Now, Arthur Andersen was the accounting firm for Enron. And you'll remember, many of you will remember, that Enron didn't last very long. They went out of business after the corruption was discovered. And the interesting thing is that it wasn't discovered by their accounting firm, by their auditing firm, Arthur Andersen. It was actually discovered by the rating agencies. Arthur Andersen also went out of business soon after this. But I'd hired Arthur Andersen Consulting, and I thought they had some very, very bright guys that were going to help me a lot. They were very smart. They were very talented. We decided that 3 changes were needed to be made simultaneously during the implementation of the world-class manufacturing. We needed to eliminate that white stock warehouse in the middle of the plant. We needed to change from economic order quantities, which was usually 5 or more of every part that we ran, to one-piece flow in the machine room. This was the world-class way of doing it. You forget about the setup time. Just make everything to order and get rid of the inventory. The other thing we had to change was the paperwork so that they could be computer printed rather than using the handwritten cards that we'd used for years and years that everybody was very familiar with. And then to make matters worse, we decided we needed to change the part numbers. The part numbers were letters and numbers, combinations, and everybody knew what they meant. So if they were making a 133 WB, they knew they were making a 133 wastebasket. And it was very helpful to the employees that they could look at the part numbers and know what they were supposed to be doing. In our wisdom, we changed to part numbers that were all numbers and didn't really have any meaning. We had an excellent team of engineers and the most skilled operators that were part of the team. We tested the system in conference room simulations. Everything worked perfectly then. I understood every single piece of the system, and I was totally confident that it was going to work. Now, I'm sure you've guessed what happened. It didn't work. At first, it appeared to be working, and we really got faked out by that. The assembly team, what was going on, though, was that the assembly teams were still pulling stock out of that white stock warehouse. And there was still stock in that warehouse, and we were supposed to be slowly working it down. And so the assembly teams were still assembling bookcases, assembling table rails, and doing the assembly, getting it together and putting it on the finishing line, and the finishing line could finish to order. But the machine room was trying to do this one-piece flow. At first, they could do it because they didn't have very much to do. They had all that white stock that they were relying on. And so we didn't realize that the machine room really couldn't complete the orders. It was too much work for them. But at first they were doing fine. And if they had a problem, they could always find somebody to ask, and they had time to do that. I thought everything was going great. I went on vacation. We went to Vail, Colorado with the family. We were having a wonderful time out there. 3 days later, I got the call from the manufacturing people and said, "Tim, this isn't working at all. We got a real mess here. Only 50% of the machine room orders are getting completed on time. We're shipping products to customers late, and when we're shipping them, they don't have all the parts. We're shipping a table with a top, with the rims, with a shelf, and 3 legs instead of 4. It was a mess. So the first thing I did is I flew back to Grand Rapids and I said, I've got to help. I got to get involved. When I got there, I saw that there were people that were calling and they wanted to talk to me. They wanted to talk to the president, and there were tons of problems down on the floor. So what I did is I moved my desk and a phone down to the manufacturing floor, and that way I could take calls from customers and at the same time I could be aware of what was going on in manufacturing. Now, I'm going to show you a picture. This is a picture that our VP of sales had made for us after everything was over. And you can see me in the picture there. I've got these pink slips that are coming out of my pockets. Those pink slips are calls from customers complaining and wanting to talk to me. Oh, Haley, thank you for putting that up. There it is in all its glory. So I was down on the floor. You can leave that up if you want. That kind of sums up everything that was going on. First thing I did is I moved my office, my plant, my desk down to the manufacturing floor, took a phone with me so that I could do two things at once. And I really, in that picture, I look scared, it's because I was scared. Next thing I did is I fired Arthur Anderson. Nobody was listening to them anyway, so we may as well get rid of them. Then I gathered my best cross-functional team. It was about 10 people. And we had to make the very tough decision. Should we go forward or should we go back to the old way of doing things? It was really tempting to go back to the old way of doing things. We knew that it worked, and we were actually a pretty good company that way. But we decided that we were so far into it that we had to keep going. So we made a list of the most important problems and began fixing them one at a time as quickly as possible. And then after we fixed them, we went back out there to see if the fix was working. And if the fix wasn't working, as was often the case, we'd fix the fix until finally we had something that worked. The other thing we did that was really important is we had a company-wide meeting to tell everybody in the company what was happening, and we promised them that with their help, we would fix the problems and we would make this work. Now, I'll be honest, we were really, really lucky. Everybody in the company decided that they wanted the company to survive and that they would pitch in and try to fix the problems. The culture saved us. We had a strong culture at Newcraft. People liked working there. People liked their managers. People liked the owners. They liked working at the company and they wanted to save it. They didn't want us to go out of business. So there are several lessons that I learned from this. The most important lesson: culture matters. Culture matters maybe more than anything else. The other things that I learned: don't trust the experts to understand your business and tell you what to do. Another thing I learned is that just because I understood the entire system didn't mean that other people did. You really need to test their knowledge to make sure that they really understand it. There are times that one individual will understand it and thinks everybody else does, but it's easy to be wrong. Finally, two things that go together: never change too many things at the same time, and whenever possible, implement new systems in small pieces, one piece at a time. We survived. We were lucky to survive. It would have been really disastrous for the company had we failed. It would have been disastrous for me in my career. I was the third generation, and I thought I was doing a great thing, and it turned out that I was just about killing the company. But we made it through it, and I'm happy about that. Diana?
Tim, thank you so much. I learned things that I didn't know about during that. So like I said, Matt and I were in law school when this was all going on. And it's funny looking at the eyes of a 20-year-old and hearing what was going on, and now looking through the eyes of a 50-year-old and hearing what was going on. And I think we can kind of make little jokes about it now, but I know that was such an emotional time and such a difficult time for the family. So thank you very much for sharing that. Our next speaker is Kyle Verplank, who's the executive chairman with Verplank Industries. He shares that responsibility with his brother, Tony. And Verplank Industries has numerous companies. They have Shape Corp, Light Corp, Pliant Plastics, and BioSolutions LLC. And Kyle is a fourth generation in their family business. So Kyle, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thank you. Happy to be here. So our story starts in 1908 in Spring Lake. My great grandfather started a company called the Spring Lake Ice Company rather. And the genesis of the business was harvesting blocks of ice in the winter out of Spring Lake and then transporting them to a warehouse and then covering those blocks of ice with sawdust and then distributing those blocks of ice throughout the local community to homes and businesses. So that business was pretty successful for a number of years. And in 1928, Spring Lake didn't freeze over. And so they had a lot of decisions to make, and they limped along until the 30s. And that's when my grandfather joined the business. And in 1930, they pivoted to coal. And literally the ice business melted away as distribution of ice kind of went the way of refrigeration. The interesting thing about pivoting into coal was at this time, they got away from a rail siding and moved the business to a dock siding. So the picture in the corner is a freighter delivering coal. And what's interesting about that is when they swapped properties, it was the first time that they had waterfront property in which to have freighters bring in the product. And so when my grandfather was in the business, the war came, and the distribution model was very similar, where you would take the product house to house and then also to businesses and industry. But as the war ended and coal went away for residential heating and the industrial side of the business started to dry up, the business was really on the ropes. When my grandfather he joined the business and took over from his father. And when my dad and his brother joined the business, there really wasn't much there. Fast forward to the 60s when they were both in the business, my grandfather had retired. They pivoted the business into aggregate. And so this is really when the business took hold. For those historians in the audience, in 1956, the Eisenhower highway system was enacted and the road building boom was on for the next several years, decades. So the business really transformed itself in the 60s into an aggregate company that then used trucks to deliver the aggregate, and that business is still thriving today in that model. The interesting story here, though, is when my dad and his brother took over, they had a 50-year run in the businesses and really became entrepreneurs. So over the next several decades, they went on to start several businesses, all very diversified, some tied to one another, some totally different or unrelated. But the story here is really just the growth that they were able to, create over the years. So fast forward to today, several businesses located, all over the world with offices and plants. We have 5,000 plus employees. We're non-union, very proud of that. We're 112 years in operation, and my brother and I represent the fourth generation of the family to run the businesses. So today we have two holding companies, which we've consolidated the different businesses under. So Verplank Enterprises and then the Verplank Family Holding Company. So the enterprise side of things is really where we have the manufacturing businesses, and then the family holding company is where we still have the different aggregate, trucking, and paving entities. So when we think about planning for the future, this is really where the story is interesting for us. And this is about the difference between estate planning and succession planning. And for us, it really starts with the generation that's running the business and what are their goals. And as a fourth generation, business, it's really interesting to see what our forefathers were really thinking about. And my dad and his brother really had a desire to perpetuate the business and not monetize it. And I think that's the single biggest, factor in our longevity is having like-minded, generations that want to perpetuate to the next generation. The other thing to think about too is when you're trying to divide, the stock or the businesses is equal fair. And this is interesting in our case where we have a sister who's not involved in the business. So how do you, divide the businesses to ensure that they continue to perpetuate, but also be fair? And then also the other thing that we've used effectively over the years are generation skipping trusts. And these are really a great vehicle for passing on stock and businesses from one generation to the next. What's interesting though is when we talk about the different structures we have with our shares, how do we keep people engaged, but those who are not in the business, how do you make sure that they can be involved but not vote, or have a say in the business, but if they're not familiar with it, not be part of some of those decisions. And then the buy and sell agreements as well is really important, and it has been for us in terms of how we can successfully pass different shares down to the different families. And I think what's interesting is when you look at a fourth generation business, typically you have hundreds of shareholders. And with our model, we today stand at effectively 6 shareholders or less. And our goal is to continue to drive that down in the successive generations. But the thing that's interesting here is the estate planning is really just one leg of the stool. So when we talk about the succession planning for our company, what's interesting is my dad and his brother were very passionate about putting the best leader in the business, regardless of whether they're a family member or not. And so they were very interested in this model of an owner versus an operator. And I think what they proved for our business was stepping aside and putting the right person in the driver's seat sometimes is better in the long run. And I think when you look at my dad and what his brother have done in terms of having non-family CEOs, which we have today in all our businesses, that model continues to work very well for us. The other thing is when you're talking about the next generation, what do they expect versus what is reality? I think there's plenty of stories about what the next generation expects from the business and expects from a position. And then there's the reality that the current generation really has to grapple with. And so there's this term that we use, it's the unspeakable. So how do you have those conversations where perhaps someone thinks they're going to get a job that really they're not qualified for? And how do you have those conversations to make sure there's no hurt feelings? And I think one of the other things that we've put in place are certain family rules about college education and certain degrees. And that's really helped kind of drive a lot of our different discussions as well. The other thing is just the planning and the implementation. And so part of the unspeakable is many times founders or current generation members have an idea of what they want the succession plan to look like, but they don't articulate it. So how do we articulate the unspeakable? And so when we talk about planning and implementation, my dad, for one, had a plan in mind, but it really didn't start to bubble up until he was sick. And this is really when it started to drive the conversation. And we went through probably a 6 to 8 month process between my brother and I and my dad talking about the different nuances of the role, how we would want to set it up, what would be the best for the business, for the family, and for all the players involved. And so the implementation was really important for us because having my dad be around to bless that and to endorse it was really impactful for us and the businesses and the people running the businesses as well. The other thing is it really never ends. So no sooner do we implement our new plan that we have to start thinking about what's next. And so with our plan, my brother and I took over jointly as a title we call executive chairman. So for us, it's really about the oversight of the multiple companies, and CEOs and presidents of each company are the direct reports to us. So we interface most directly with them. We focus on the synergies across the different family of companies and longer term perspective. So for us, it's being strategic in nature, dealing with a lot of the high level detail. A lot of our CEOs are great operators and they're there for the right reasons. The other is to perpetuate and embody the core values and the core purpose that really drive our people and our businesses and what we really hang our hat on each and every day. And the other one is to be present and engaged with the employees and really have that connection. The family connection is really something that we talk a lot about, and it's important that even though we're at a certain level that may not be in the operating detail, we do try to be as present as possible, be in the plants, be in as many meetings as we can, because that family connection is really important for us. And then the community involvement and the philanthropy, that's really run through the office of the executive chairman. We've really tried to be deliberate about that and make sure that our giving and our community activities are really tied to our core purpose. And then perhaps most importantly is make sure the business continues to be successful as we plan for the next generation coming on board. So here's just a quick look at our 4 generations of leadership. And the current generation, my brother and I were both in our 40s, and the 5th generation is currently ages 6 to 13. So our succession planning is starting now, and that's what our goal and our focus will be. Thank you.
Kyle, thank you so much. I think so often we hear about people who have not been as diligent and intentional with their planning, and that can lead to a really, really difficult time with your family business. So it's wonderful that so many of these things have been thought out ahead of time. So thank you very much for sharing all the things that you've put in place. Excuse me. Our next speaker is Doug Young, who is the president of Beeler Young. Doug is a 3rd generation leader, and currently his son Cam just joined the family business. So Doug, thank you so much for being a part of our program today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So glad to be here and share a little bit of what family business issues. So the question is, how do you survive a crisis? Or perhaps a better question is, how do you prepare yourself to be able to survive a crisis? My answer for that is to surround yourself with the right kind of support well in advance. Let's face it, you're not going to know when a crisis is going to strike or what type of a crisis that might be. So let me set the stage. Many of you perhaps participated in the Great Recession back in 2006 to 10. For Beeler Young, we're an HVAC distributor. We sell to contractors, and part of our business at that time was to sell products to residential new construction companies. Well, essentially in March of 2006 in Michigan, it was like a light switch. The residential new construction business turned off. That was roughly 35 to 50% of our business, depending upon when you looked at it. So the Great Recession started in 2006 for us, and it lasted to the beginning of 2010. Over that period of time, we lost 40% of our revenue. We were forced to cut 40% of our staff. It was excruciating. Year after year, revising our plans, how we were going to make our expense budgets work, determining what cuts we were going to have to make. The good news, since I'm standing here today, is that during that time, we were able to revamp our market focus and reduce our focus on the residential new construction business that had been a big part of what we had done before. Now our business is much more replacement and service product oriented, which is much more resilient to the ups and downs of the economy. So that's crisis number 1. So if that's not bad enough, I have to think back to July 6th, 2007, in the middle of the Great Recession. I'm at lunch with a couple of our team leaders, and we're discussing the next rendition of our strategic plan and how we're going to make our budgets work. I get one of those phone calls that you never want to get. Doug, your son has had a severe accident. He's alive, he's in the hospital, but he has broken his neck, and we do not know how severe. There we go. Sorry about that. Let me back up then. So if that was not bad enough, the economic downturn, I think back to July 6, 2007, in the middle of the Great Recession. I'm at lunch with a couple of our leaders talking about the next rendition of our strategic plan, and I get the call that you never want to get. Doug, your son has had a severe accident. He's alive. He's in the hospital, but he's broken his neck, and we don't know how severe. Our son Cameron was in a study abroad program in Spain. Needless to say, my wife and I got to San Sebastian, Spain, as soon as we could to find our son, lying in the ICU, able to breathe, but not able to move any part of his body. They would perform a spinal fusion of the C5, 6, and 7 vertebrae in the lower part of his neck. We would stay in Spain for 2 weeks, partly due to a bout of pneumonia that occurred. But then we were able to get him home on a special jet to Grand Rapids. Then a 1 week stay in the Spectrum ICU, and then 12 weeks at Mary Free Bed. They did an incredible job with his rehabilitation. They were able to get him into a wheelchair and then use a power chair. He was eventually able to drive an accessible van that he can get around in by himself. Cam now has independence. He worked at Steelcase in marketing for 9 years. He's on several nonprofit boards. And now he's working, I'm glad to say, at Beeler Young in digital marketing and on a training program for the future. It's been an incredible journey, as you can tell. The first year was horrifying with this accident, on top of what was happening in our business. I was literally in a fog. I had trouble thinking. And our family was doing everything that we could to hang on and survive. If it were not for an incredible group of supporters, we would not have made it. We needed help with meals. We needed help to revamp our house to accommodate Cam. Cam needed outpatient rehab. Cam was adamant about returning to University of Michigan to complete his education, which he did. We could not do all that by ourselves. Kim and I have a strong extended family. We both have a strong faith. We were both in Bible study programs. We have a tight group of friends and neighbors. BY has a great board of directors. I'm involved in a group called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. In fact, my dear friend Tim Shad, who you just heard speak, is part of that YPO group and on our board. I can never repay Tim for his support. Tim offered to come in, excuse me, Tim offered to come in and sit with me, and he was there willing to help me think through what we needed to do with our business. We were incredibly blessed to have such a great support team. I need to point out that all these relationships were started decades before it was obvious we were going to need this kind of support. The major message here is don't wait for the crisis to occur and then try to develop your support team. You need to be proactive in developing a support network to get you through the challenges of life. And again, you don't know what's going to happen and when's it going to happen. I pray that no one has to go through what we did, but we survived the crisis because we had support. So what does this mean for you? What can you do to build your support system? Consider what crisis you've been in recently, perhaps how you handled the COVID crisis. Did you have proper support system to help you get through that? whether it's at work or at home. Consider how you develop your own support system. It might be through a professional organization, or serving on a board, or being involved somehow with other business leaders. You also need to look at your personal support outside of work, like your family, your neighbors, friends, Bible study, church, whatever. Good luck with building your team. Start now. God bless.
Doug, thank you so much for sharing that story. I think that's one of the scariest things that a parent can ever face, and to have that on top of the recession, and to have that. And it has been my pleasure getting to know Cam. Cam is very involved with FBA and is just an amazing person. And so I'm thrilled that he's working with your business. And I really very much thank you for sharing that. So thank you. We're going to take about a 30-second shift just to move chairs in. Please stay on your cameras. Please type in questions. I'm going to start looking at questions, and we will, if you have a specific person in mind, just put their name first, put Tim dash and then your question, or Doug dash and then your question, and we'll be sure to ask that specific person. If not, I may just open it up to the panel. So we will be shifting in just a second. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you. We made that transition okay. Well, our first question is from our FBA president. This is from Brent Van Haren. Kyle, what were the biggest challenges putting the plan together in such a short time? And I will walk this over to you.
Thanks, Brent. Good question. I think one of the things that really benefited me and our family during this process was in 2016, I joined the Jander Noah mentorship program. And for those of you who know GEM, it's a great program. Every year they take 10 or 11 mentees, and I was fortunate to be linked with Mike Jander Noah. And as the process for us really started to heat up, I got very involved to bring in some other people in his network to help us kind of through some of the different nuances of the plan. And so, you know, like Doug talked about the importance of the network, having Mike involved with our process was, you know, looking back, it was almost fortuitous that he was, you know, involved when he was. And so for us, great asset, and helped us work through some different issues.
Doug, the next question is for you, and it's, how did you decide to pivot to services rather than just new construction?
Let me explain our business a little bit more. So we are a distributor. We buy products, equipment, accessories, parts from a variety of different manufacturers, and then sell those to contractors. So some of the contractors focused on residential new construction, new home building. Some of those contractors would focus on replacement business. So if your furnace or air conditioner went out, they would go in and either fix it and replace it with parts, service parts, or replace the equipment totally, and you'd have a new furnace, let's say. So we were already in the replacement and service parts selling business. We never got into doing service ourselves. That would be competing with our customers. So we sell to contractors that do the service work, but the primary emphasis today is on those products that they are replacing in the service parts.
Tim, the next question is for you. And it is, how did you decide to go forward with the ERP deployment when everything was sideways? And did the vision to be world-class manufacturing remain the same?
This was a long time ago, so I may not have all the details right, but the key thing was gathering a group of people, both the technical people and then also the people that worked at the company who represented the culture, and making the decision together. I didn't have the biggest vote. I had a vote. Everybody else had to participate, and we needed to decide, can we go forward? And if we can't go forward, how are we going to go backward? And if we're going to try to go backward, what will happen? And it really was a decision that we were concerned that if we tried to go back, we wouldn't be able to do that. We thought that we were going to screw it up even more if we tried to go back, and that we would never be able to recover, and we would never be able to try again. We thought this was probably the last chance that we had to implement a new modern system. World-class manufacturing was important then. It continues to be important. The net result was that we were able to get the system working. And today, everything that we do in the company is all make to order. When we lay up our own panels, and those are all being made up with a certain customer in mind. When we machine the parts, they're all being made to order. When we assemble products, it's only for that customer. And when we finish, it's only for that customer. As a result, we're able to do things that we weren't able to do before. We're able to handle many different veneers. We're able to handle many different finishes. We're able to handle many different kinds of materials. We didn't really know where it was going to lead us, but we were sure that it was the right way to go.
Thank you. Kyle, this is an interesting question, and I was wondering about that. When you and your brother were taking on leadership positions, how did you work through titles?
So I guess it depends on when you say we actually joined the business. I'm sure for many of you guys out there, I started when I was 14 and really didn't have a title till I rejoined the business maybe 15 years later. But when we got to our current role in the business, it was really around what do we want for the people that are running the businesses, because in our opinion, they're the most important. And so when you think about someone representing Shape Corp, for example, if he or she were to introduce themselves as a certain title, then the next question would be, okay, who's really the boss? And what we wanted to make sure that when we chose the title of executive chairman, it was clear to not only the CEO of that particular business, but the people that they're interfacing with, that they are the chief executive officer of that respective business. So for us, it was a way to be involved as much or as little as we'd like. But at the end of the day, that CEO of that particular business is really running that business.
So this next question is actually addressed to Kyle because he mentioned it, but I'm going to address it to both Kyle and Doug because Doug happens to be a mentor. But the question is, how do you apply to be in the Jandanoa mentoring program? What is the process, and can anyone apply? So maybe Kyle, if you can talk about it as being part of the program, and then Doug, if you can talk about being a mentor.
Yeah, so the process is actually pretty easy to apply. If you go to the website, it'll kind of detail how to do that. And what I found interesting was the selection process. They actually came out and did a site visit. And then they had a meeting where you did some, they called it speed dating. And the mentors, like Doug, have a bio. And it's pretty easy to look through the different prospective mentors to see what their background is, and see who would potentially be the best fit for you, not only business-wise, but other interests. And then you go through that selection process. So that's how you kind of vet it out.
So on the other side of the table, the mentor side, we had to apply as well to become a mentor. Right kinds of experience, so that if you got matched up with a mentee such as Kyle, that you'd be in a position to help, in a broad spectrum of areas. Kyle made an important point earlier. There was only, I think, 11 in your class of new mentees. So it's a 3-year program. A mentor and a mentee would be assigned to, it'd be a selection process where the mentee and the mentor agreed that we'd have to score you first, second, third, and then they try to get the best fit for each pair. But that would last for 3 years. And up front, maybe you would meet once every 2 weeks, maybe then move to 3 weeks, and that. And incredibly rewarding process for me as a mentor. I know the mentee that I had really got a lot out of it. In fact, something that I think is appropriate for this group, our biggest goal for that 3-year period was to set up an advisory council board, so that he would have guidance going on forward. And I think backing into my talk, having a board of directors or an advisory board is crucial if you're in a family business. And I know that for all 3 of us, it's been very, very useful.
So this is for anyone, but Tim, I'm going to ask you first, and if anybody else wants to add in, go right ahead. The question is, how did being family owned help your business deal with your crisis?
Diana, that's a really good question. Being family owned was part of the culture, and frankly, it ended up being the way that we treated people. We treated people as if they were part of the family. And my grandfather had done that. My father had done that. I was doing that. And to this day, it's still the way that it works there. And it was one of the reasons that people really liked being there. And that was one of the reasons that the culture worked. And I think it's one of the big reasons that people said, we don't want this company to die just because they've screwed up the computer system. We're willing to help them get through it because we don't want to work someplace else. We like working here. We don't want this company to die.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Doug?
I'm going to almost echo what Tim said, but I just want to do it with great emphasis. Family business is all about the culture. It's all about the people working together. In that, had we been a public company, I don't think I would have been running it while we had 4 years of multi-million-dollar losses. That's not very good operating performance. But my board did keep me on. Thank you very much, Tim. And it's we today are an incredible company with incredible people, and it's because of that culture that helps us be very good at what we do. We've just got great people and great leaders, and really happy about that. But I think it's because of our family business aspect.
Yeah, along those same lines, I think longevity is a tremendous asset and a huge competitive advantage. And when you think about, you know, multi-generation businesses, the perspective tends to be very long-term. And as Doug mentioned, you know, when you go through some ups and downs or some recessions, it's not about making the next quarter's numbers. It's about doing what's right for the long term. And so I think in terms of how we run our business and our team runs the business and our employees recognize we're there for the long term, which I think is a huge asset.
Have a little feedback from Ana Gonzalez, another one of our board members. Just feedback for the panel. Amazing stories, great advice. Thank you. So I would echo that. Thank you all very much. So this one, I'm not sure who to assign this one to, but it's, what would be your recommendations on building a team that has to deal with 4 family members who have very different personalities? Anyone want to take that one? Kyle?
Well, I think the first thing I would try to understand is, are they all truly interested in being active? Because a lot of times, you know, for those who have seen Succession is it on Netflix? Have you seen that? I think you got a few people that really aren't interested in being in the business, but they like the notion of the business. So I think who really wants to be in the active role, and then trying to understand what their particular talents are. And then I think the notion of an advisory board or some sort of family board that can, you know, give these individuals an outlet for involvement, but maybe not direct day-to-day activity would be one way to look at it. If they all truly want to be in the business, that may be time to hire a non-family CEO and maybe go that route. But that's a very difficult situation.
So this is going to be my plug. If you're not a member, join FBA, because we've got great peer groups. We've got great programs on that. We've got great resources. If you are already a member, then we're thrilled to have you, and give us a call and we'll talk through that a little bit more, because that is an interesting question. So there are no more formal questions here, but I have one that I wanted to ask Tim. And Doug, you so wonderfully shared resources you relied on, and Kyle, you shared resources you relied on. And Tim, I'm just curious, when this was going on, I know you've been part of YPO, you've been part of FBA. What were resources that you relied on when all this was happening?
Now, remember, this is 1996. The FBA did not exist at that time. I was a member of YPO, and I was in a forum. And a forum in YPO is a group of people who are very, very close and with whom you can share confidentially all the issues that you're facing. My YPO forum was an important part of getting through it. And then a lot of friends that I had were very important getting through it. We had a board of directors at that time. And once we'd made decisions on what we were going to do, we would always take those decisions to the board. And they never told us no, but they often told us, have you thought about this? And when they're saying, have you thought about this, you darn well better think about it, because it's important, or they wouldn't be saying it. And so there were a couple of times that we had things that we wanted to do, but we maybe hadn't thought them through completely. I will say, though, that none of the board had told us that we shouldn't implement the new ERP system. So, you know, it's not like these boards and advisors are infallible. They also can make mistakes.
Good. Well, thank you. I'll have one other question. If anybody has any others, go ahead and type them. But we just got one. We got from Joe Schmieder. The YPO format was used as the model for the FBA peer groups. Tim was the key driver to make them happen. So that is very true. Our peer groups are awesome. We've got great moderators, great participants, and they are modeled on YPO with confidentiality issues and with trying to get vulnerable with your peer group mates. And so it's been, I know for my husband was both in YPO and in an FBA peer group, and they've both been incredibly valuable. I think he turned to the FBA more for family issues, and he uses YPO now for a lot of the business issues, but it's wonderful for both. So the only other question I have, and Doug, you did a really nice job of talking about lessons learned from going through that, and I'm just curious, Tim or Kyle, do you have any takeaways from kind of having gone through it that you'd like to share with our audience, just on other things that you can do when something happens, or possibly, Kyle, a lot of yours is to avoid things from happening, but if you have any last advice, that would be great.
Yeah, the main piece of advice that I came out of this with is when you're implementing major computer systems, try not to change too many things at once. Later in life, I had a chance to work at Grand Valley, and we implemented what for Grand Valley was a major ERP system. We were changing the admissions process, we were changing financial aid, we were changing finance, we were changing HR, we were changing payroll systems, which the faculty cared a lot about. We implemented all of those things one at a time, and it was much, much easier than trying to implement everything at once.
Yeah, I think for our process, it was really transparency, and I owe a huge debt of gratitude to both my dad and his brother for being so transparent. And one of the things that really resonated with me was when I was in the FBA forum with my group. One day the topic was succession planning, and we went around the table and we talked about, conversations, each member had with their parents or their father or mother. And, I told them about our discussion, and we got to one of my peers, and he said, my dad told me I will find out the plan when he's dead. And that one really was interesting, because you look at the conversations I had and had been having with my dad and brother, and then you look at the other end of the spectrum. And so my advice would be, if anyone is in the position of I don't know, the first thing to do is to start asking. And transparency, I think, is really the most fundamental building block.
Thank you. Well, I don't see any more questions. Does any of the panelists have any other last comments that you'd like to share, or any other last thoughts? Well, that's it. I'd like to thank you all three. Wonderful stories, great different experiences, not good experience, but learning experiences. And it's amazing to hear how you got through them and how things have evolved since then. So thank you all very, very much for joining us today. I will just let everybody know we have a couple of programs coming up. We have a skeet shoot, which is a blast, is my favorite program of the year. So that's in October, on October 1st, if you can join us. And we have a lunch with leaders, which will be a little bit more of an informal format where you can meet with Mike Byam and Dave Straw doing a conversation about leadership with Terry Berry and different things that people may be seeing with their businesses now during COVID. So on that note, thank you all for joining us. We would love your feedback. Send me a text, send Melissa or Haley a text. Let us know what else we can do. And if this format worked, let us know that as well. So thank you all very much. Thank you for joining us.